11, Report 18-0445, Precise Development Plan 16-7, and a Parking Plan 16-2 to allow a new three-story detached 2,744 square foot commercial building with ground floor retail and a second and third floor office space to be constructed behind the existing 1,841 square foot single-family residence, which will be converted to a single-unit motel, and a parking plan to allow the 12-space parking requirement be met with 4 on-site spaces, including 1 tandem space, plus fees in lieu for 8 spaces on a 4,023 square foot lot in the C2 Restricted Commercial Zoning District at 70 10th Street, and adoption of a mitigated negative declaration. I need a rest after that. Do we have a staff report, please?
All right, thank you, Chair. The 4,023 square foot lot houses an approximately 1,840 square foot, 2-story single-family residence and contains 1 parking space, which is accessed from the alley to the south from 10th Court. To avoid adverse impacts to both the historic integrity of the existing structure and to maintain eligibility for designation as a historic district, the applicant proposes no physical changes to the structure. The structure is proposed to be adaptively reused as a single-unit motel and is conditioned to pay the necessary transient occupancy taxes and receive a business license with the city. The small scale along 10th Street will be retained in a new 3-story detached 2,744 square foot commercial building will be constructed at the rear of the site. The project is located within the downtown district where the proposed ground floor retail tenant space is favorable and contributes to a pedestrian-oriented environment, and office uses are limited to the upper floor levels. 12 parking spaces are required for the combination of uses on site, and city code requires that a minimum of 25% of the required parking spaces be provided on site. Therefore, at least 3 parking spaces must be provided on site. The applicant requests a parking plan to allow the 12-space parking requirement to be met with 4 on-site parking spaces, including 1 which is in tandem, which will be tucked beneath the 2nd floor of the new building, plus fees in lieu for 8 parking spaces. A bicycle rack is proposed to be provided along Hermosa Avenue frontage. The city, through an agreement with the Coastal Commission, has an approved parking in lieu fee program. The basic concept is to allow for the development of smaller properties in the downtown where it is not possible or not practical to provide all required parking on site, and funds are collected which can be used for future improvements to the city's parking, public parking. An example of this would be the parking structure on 13th Street. The threshold limit was established at 100 parking spaces, and the city has not yet reached this threshold. If the applicant's request to purchase 8 in lieu spaces is approved tonight, the city's inventory of available in lieu spaces will be reduced to 26. And once the city reaches the 100 space threshold, additional parking must be constructed or no additional in lieu parking may be authorized. The city's general plan states that within the downtown district, parking should be provided off-site through public or private shared parking facilities, with any on-site parking situated to the rear of the building and hidden and screened, which this project provides. The Commission must find that the parking deficiency on-site will not unduly impact the surrounding area. Public parking spaces are provided throughout the downtown between 16th Street and 8th Street and as far east as Ardmore Avenue, where the total combination of public parking lots and metered street parking spaces have an occupancy rate of 48% on weekday afternoons. Although specific users of the proposed multi-tenant building are unknown at this time, it may be assumed that employees and patrons will be visiting other downtown businesses and can avail themselves of the Park Once strategy, such that the proposed 4 on-site parking spaces would be sufficient to satisfy their needs for parking during peak demand periods. No new curb cuts are proposed, and all on-street parking spaces will be preserved. As part of this project, a mitigated negative declaration was prepared and is attached for reference. The project will not have significant impact on the environment with adoption of and certification of the mitigated negative declaration and implementation of the mitigation measure, which is very detailed in the conditions of approval, but in summary, it requires that during periods of site preparation, when heavy equipment will be in use, an acoustic engineer shall monitor and report vibration levels, and results shall be provided to our community development director for review and approval. We received many valuable letters from the public, received both in opposition and in support of the project, and they've been included as supplemental items to the report. And so in summary, we have, based on the analysis above and detailed in the report, the proposed precise development plan 16-7 and parking plan 16-2 as conditioned are consistent with applicable sections of our municipal code and general plan. And staff recommends the Planning Commission adopt the attached resolutions approving the precise development plan and parking plan and adopting the mitigated negative declaration. So that concludes my report, and we have our architect and applicants here tonight as well who can answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Nicole. Do any commissioners have any ex parte disclosures to make at this time?
No.
Seeing none. Any questions of staff at this time?
Not yet.
No. Would the applicant like to address, or the architect address, the commission?
Good evening. My name is Dean Thomas, and I'm a partner at B&J Capital. And this has been like a 2.5-year endeavor for us, and we didn't expect it to be this complex. But I brought like 8 copies of some documents for your review, if you'd like to, if I can give them to you, or... When we entered into escrow on this property in September of 2015 at 70 10th Street, the intent was to design and build a property that would be a complement to the community with retail and office space, similar to, I would say, the Chamber of Commerce building, which is right across the street, or the Starbucks building, which is off of 14th Street. When we design the building, attached you'll find a rendering of the submitted project and a rendering of our original project that we submitted. In approximately March of 2016, we submitted this contemporary building that went street to street, and at that time we were notified by the city that we needed to do a historical study on the property, of which we did. We went through a process where the city interviewed 3 independent consultants and hired the one that I guess met the best time frame and the best budget. We've never really had communication with this independent consultant, with the exception of one time when we had a meeting with CEQA, city staff, the consultants at City Hall. So after we did the historical study, it was deemed that the property was not a historical property, but could be considered a historical resource due to the fact that there were 5 continuous single families in a row on 10th Street. Back in time, the city of Hermosa Beach rezoned this property to commercial, as at one time it was a residential property, and has had a single family home on the property since it was built. After we did the historical study, again, it was deemed the property, to my recollection, was not a historical property, but could be considered a historical resource. And we called a meeting with staff, with CEQA, with the architect, with my other partners to discuss what we can do or what we cannot do with the property, or what were the possibilities that we could do if we wanted to proceed with our existing design, or if we wanted to work with the city and keep the existing building and work with the historical resource and design something that would be compatible and keep the resource. It was determined that if we wanted to do our original property, that we could do a environmental study and see what the impact was. The fee was significant and the timing was also significant. So we decided we would put the original project on hold, work with staff, work with CEQA, work with the consultants to come up with a property that would have the same architectural design as the original structure, and actually offer the services with retail and offices to the community, which we believe the community can use. While we were doing this design, and because the home is being historical resource as a single family, if we kept it a single family for residential usage, it would have remained a non-conforming use, because you cannot have a single family on a commercial property. So the term one unit hotel, which I've been a licensed real estate person since 1979, and I went to Redondo High School, I've raised in this area, I've never once heard of that term, single unit hotel or motel. But the purpose was to bring the zoning into coordinates with, so it would not be a non-conforming use, and we would be able to offer the unit available for short-term usage for local neighbors or visitors, local residents or visitors. So I just wanted to interject that that's where that single hotel unit came from, was merely to bring it into a conforming zone with the current city zones. After working with the company, the agencies involved, we actually thought the new structure looked quite nice. It complements the existing property that's there. We were able to put in an extra parking spot with the design, because the existing spot that is with the residents on the west side of the property doesn't quite fit a car properly, so we added the existing parking from the rear side. So after 2 years and 4 months, we actually were able to complete and get a recommendation from the historical committee based on the architectural design that Larry put together. I believe we worked very diligently on keeping the historical resource if that's what the community wanted, although we liked our original project much better. We wanted to work with the city, and if the city considered that a historical resource, and if CEQA thought that was best, then we were doing our best to accommodate that. And I don't think I have any other comments at this time, but available for questions.
Commissioners, any questions for the applicant at this time? Mr.
Thank
Key,
you.
how would you like to address the commission?
I have a couple of questions.
Commissioner Seaman has some questions.
Thank you very much for being here tonight.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate your effort. And I just had a couple quick questions. In the new building, there's 4 spaces there, parking spaces, including 1 handicap space. Are those 4 spaces for the exclusive use of the commercial building, or is that this 1 space or some of those spaces for use by the single unit motel?
Can I have you answer these questions? Can I have the architect answer these questions,
please.
sir? Yes.
Yes, thank you.
With regards to that, you cannot designate spaces, is my understanding. So they're just basically, you have 4 spaces, other than the handicap space, of course,
Right.
Which is designated for a specific use. But otherwise, we can't designate, kind of like a discussion before, employee parking or any other things along those lines.
Yeah, it was just not so much employee parking, but just the motel. Let's just call it the motel for the time being. The motel has no specific designated parking of its own.
Correct.
And is there no way to achieve that at all? I've seen the plot.
Our understanding is that we don't have the ability to do that
Okay.
through code, through city code, is my understanding. So we really can't designate that. Yeah.
Okay. Then that would bring up another question for staff, though. So the 4 spaces there are for tenants or tenants, employees, and customers of the commercial building,
Correct.
essentially.
Correct.
Okay. Customers of the building. Okay. So, all right. I think that's the only question I have.
I was going to do just a brief kind of overview of where we went through with regards to some of the design. So after we designed the original larger building, which you have before you, which was of a contemporary style, we had really a complete change in direction with regards to the design style based on the comments from the historical consultants. Obviously, they wanted us to work with the vocabulary of the existing structure that's on site. To be honest, that existing structure doesn't have a lot of vocabulary to work with. It's, I think, been through a few, let's say, remodels, and so I think it's lost some of it, probably its original character. But that being said, what we did do is we used a couple of elements from the porch, the columns and porch. We kind of used, you can see that in the theme. The siding is siding that's going to mimic which is on the existing structure right now. The triple windows that you kind of see in the, it's hard to see, but off the porch, there's a certain proportion of window that we took and also incorporated it into the new building. So that was how we tried to carry the vocabulary from the one building to the next as best we could. Obviously, the steep roof on the existing structure is impossible for us to mimic and come up with any kind of square footage on this building. Plan-wise, as you can see, it was a little bit tough because on the first floor, the bulk of it is parking. We're trying to put as much parking on this lot as we could, as we can. The original design had parking coming off of both streets, which enabled us to provide quite a bit more parking. But once we were kind of, if you will, forced into keeping the existing structure there, that really minimized what we could do parking-wise. We have 4 spaces, and that's on a 30-foot wide lot, and one being a handicap space, which is 12 feet itself in width. The plans and up above that we have so on the first floor, along with the parking, we have a small retail space which could be used for a number of different things. It's relatively small, a little over 450 square feet, but there are I actually, in my Starbucks building, I have a small space in there that the Paradise ice cream space is in, and it is really surprising. It's really tiny, but it was, when we had it up for lease, it leased really I mean, there was a lot of people with interest in it. So at first I didn't think that was going to be it'd be tough to do, but it actually wasn't. So just to let you know, on the top 2 floors, we have basically 2 offices on each floor. The building, because of building code-wise, there's a lot that goes on with this building besides just what's there. We have 2 exits, so we have 2 stairways we have to deal with. We have an elevator, and then of course mechanical and electrical, which needs to be accounted for. So with all of that, that's kind of where we are. And obviously, I'm here for any questions that help you out with.
I'm sorry, I do have another couple of questions.
Sure.
If you don't mind. Are you planning on remodeling or refurbishing the motel also?
It'll be upgraded, it'll be cleaned up, etc. I'm not sure, to be honest with you, with regards to structural, where the building department's going to put us in that. It's kind of tough because we're not doing anything to the building, so technically I don't think we have to upgrade structurally, but in a sense the use is going to change. So that's one thing I'm going to need to talk to the building department with regards to that.
And the reason I asked that is I was there visiting the site, and I noticed that there is some cracked brick foundation. I'm sure that brick foundation
that's going to need to be addressed without a doubt.
And in other areas, I noticed the dirt level, the grade outside the building is well above the wood siding. So this is
it's going to be completely regraded and
so all of those conditions, structural conditions, would have to be cleaned up. You're going to change the windows or anything to match the new building?
Well, it's more of they wanted us to match the old. We're going to put old windows in the new building. No.
Yeah, that's another way.
That's kind of what they wanted us to do. But no, I'm not sure where the exact amount of work that's going to go into there, but we're definitely going to clean it up. It's been Well, before it's what it is right now, the white building, I don't know if you remember, it was when it was green. It was, pretty sad looking, let's put it that way. Just the coat of paint, in a sense, really kind of makes it look a lot nicer than what it is. But
Yeah.
there's a lot that needs to be gone through, just from top to bottom, to be able to use it in the new use that they're looking at.
Right. So you're going to essentially clean it up, obviously.
Correct.
And a question from staff would be if there is any requirements for, I don't know if you want to consider, you're calling it a one-unit motel, but is it indeed a short-term rental, which is perfectly okay, I suppose, in a commercial zone? It has not been approved or disapproved, so are there any parking requirements for a one-unit motel? Let's put it that way. And
One space.
how many spaces and how do we address that?
So the parking for a one-unit motel, the requirement is one space. So because the prior residential use had one space on site, there's no increase in the requirement. And something I'd like to clarify too is that the 4 parking spaces that are proposed at the rear are for all uses on site, including the motel use. And because of the combination of uses, we have office and retail, although we don't know who the tenants are going to be.
Sure.
Their peak periods are typically different than a motel. And, if those are not occupied after 5 p.m., a motel user could then park at the rear and,
But one space would have to be designated for the motel.
nope,
No.
there's flexibility.
Even
It's
though
for all
a
uses.
motel is supposed to have a space.
It's basically that there's no, similar to, let's say, it's existing legal non-conforming. So, I don't know if I want to jump across the board.
I
or
think
maybe
it's
Kim can
simpler just
jump
to
in.
say parking in these kind of mixed-use scenarios are more efficient
Flexible.
when it's shared.
Yeah.
First come, first serve.
I agree with that.
Yeah,
but
so that's,
if
that's the concept.
Okay, but we've changed the zoning, or the use of the building from existing non-conforming, by the applicant themselves said that they've changed that, so it's now conforming in a commercial zone. Being a motel, no longer a single-family, non-conforming. So now that it is conforming, and it is a motel, it should have a parking space.
Which,
Well, its parking space contributes to the total required. There's 12 total required. One of those is that the contribution is from the motel to
Okay.
get to
All
that
right,
number
so
of 12.
technically, legally, yes,
Yeah,
that one space has been provided in the 12 spaces
Right.
that. 8 of
you
which-
calculate the
8 of which
required
doesn't-
parking
don't really
based on
exist.
you calculate the required parking based on the aggregate of the mixed uses, and that's where you come up with the 12.
Yeah,
And the most efficient way to use parking in a mixed-use scenario is to share it in terms of, so that,
all right.
so you don't have a situation, if you had one designated for a motel, it would possibly would sit empty for 3 days when no one's occupying the motel. Or it would sit, so it's not, it's very inefficient to designate spaces separately, so that's why we
Right.
don't
And if
encourage
we
that.
had 12 spaces, that wouldn't be even a question.
Right.
Everybody be
Right.
happy. Okay, all right, one other question. Just out of curiosity, the surfboard storage, why? Why?
It's basically for office use. It doesn't have to be surfboards. It could be a stand-up paddleboard or high kayak or something like that. But it's basically storage for the office use. Our thought would be kind of nice. I mean, we've done a couple other projects along where, and if you notice, we have a shower in the
That was my
restroom.
next question.
And so that somebody can go out, surf in the morning before they go to work and put their board in there, take a shower and go up and go to work.
Okay, so you're not
Yeah.
expecting customers to surf
No,
there?
that was more for the people that are using the.
Do business and then leave. Okay.
No.
All right, it was just kind of an oddity, I was
Sure.
surprised. And then I did actually finally find the bike rack. There's a 5-space bike rack that will be in the rear of the motel.
Right, correct.
Okay. Would it be possible for that to be any bigger than 5?
We could try. I don't remember exactly the size that we had in there, but we. Excuse- Okay.
Yeah, okay. Okay,
Yeah.
all right. And then lastly, was it ever considered to do underground parking for the new
It's
building?
really kind of impossible to do on this type of a lot. By the time you get your slope, your ramp to get down to that level, I've gone through this a million times on small lot. People ask me to do this in Hermosa Beach the last 34 years. By the time you get a ramp going down and you try to park and back up space, you end up with less
Probably
park.
get 4 spaces down.
Probably less than 4.
All right, the only reason I brought it up is because if it was possible that would, of course, increase your retail almost.
They would be, it would make a lot of sense, yeah. That's where people try to accumulate lots so that they can then get to a point where it becomes efficient and have that use, yeah.
And then lastly, I'd just like to say that I think your effort to save the house and as a historical, it's not a historical landmark, but
No,
as a
it's
historic
not.
district, I think is commendable very much so. I really, and I'm sure a lot of people in Hermosa Beach feel the same way, that, boy, they're tearing down another old granny house and they're gonna put up some
Right.
thing, you know? And to not do that when you could, I think is very commendable, and I do appreciate it. And I really like the idea of, as much as possible, architecturally marrying the two together, which, you know, can be done somewhat. I notice the siding is very similar, and if the paint colors and stuff are the same, and maybe a little handrail and so on, that really will have a look of being the same.
Right, we're using some of the details
Feel,
and trying to, even just some of the moldings and things like that are going to be
And I
carried
think you've
through.
done a great job of that, and
Thank
I
you.
want to thank you for your effort. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Commissioner Seaman. Any other? Commissioner Hoffman?
I wonder if you would talk through, looking at the space, you have 1,800 square feet in the existing building, which is, all we're saving is the shell. Why the motel? I understand the parking implications, but the offices you're ending up with are, what, 800 square feet, something like that? You got an 1,800, in other words, you could have done 2 offices in that building, and then would give you, trying to gross out the same square footage would have, you could have increased the office space there and provided more parking, less on the new building, and come out with the same amount of rentable
Well,
space.
if we converted the existing house to office space,
Right.
we would be,
I understand the parking.
we'd be required to have more parking,
I
so like
understand
an
that,
additional 7
but-
parking spaces.
But then you take it off the back end, in other words. The new building would not have needed to be as big to gross out the same rentable space.
Well, you know, you would have less because we'd have less building. I mean, you couldn't take away and still have the same. In other words, now they have an opportunity to rent this space and obviously in a different manner, but it's in a way to make some revenue, that if you were to convert that into office, you wouldn't have that hotel
No,
use.
but I'd have a
available.
lot more revenue, I anticipate.
Not so sure. That part I'm not
Steady
trying to be, I'm not trying to be,
understand.
I'm doing more of what, architectural wise, but I'm not sure about as far as
Right.
the use.
All right.
Thank you, Commissioner Hoffman. Commissioner Peterson, any questions for Mr. Peja?
I don't have any questions at this time. I'll defer and get to the public hearing.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We'll now open the public comment section. To those of you who've been patiently waiting, anyone caring to address the commission on this item, please come forward and state your name and please sign in.
We've never done this before, so forgive us.
We're
And
on.
you guys have got to be hungry and you've got to be
Thank you,
tired.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, and board members. We are residents. We actually live right next door to this proposed project. And I just would like to ask the city not to grant this partial overdevelopment, period, or maybe just put a little bit more thought into it. We've resided next door there since 2011, and just in the time that we've been there, it's been a challenge because parking has been an issue. Just the way that the structure is. They're parking on the west side. They're blocking our personal approach. We've had to call parking enforcement regularly when we come up. We don't frequent here this often. It's a second home for us. And it's just been a challenge. So we can only imagine that with a new development, this will be even more out of hand. So, for example, some of these issues that we believe that I'd like you to think about, because it is a big change of use of this property. There's more activities, and the noise level potential for the applicant is just going to be big. It's going to be a lot more for the community. Increased parking congestion. I mean, parking is already a nuisance. It really is, and it's going to be even more impacted with whatever they're proposing to bring on. 3 stories. I mean, where this property is going to be developed completely will shadow our whole little sliver of a backyard. We'll have no sunlight. I mean, we come here for the sunlight at the beach, but sometimes we do like to appreciate our own little space. We're dwarfed already by a 3-story unit that's right behind us, so you've then just boxed us in. And I just feel that we needed to make our point clear on this. I do believe that this is kind of an overbuilt lot for a quaint little neighborhood. The antiquity historic value of the home. Now, I'm a builder, and I work on historic restoration. This home has been remodeled in an unorthodox way since we've been there by the new developers. I mean, I don't even know what permits you have on site for that, but I would really recommend somebody walk through and take a look at that. Because you're commenting now about the value of the quality of the work that's there. No. The house has been modified and changed, and I would really encourage you to dig deeper into it. If there's ADA compliance issues, definitely the parking issues. I mean, we're just going to stand as concerned neighbors of the community, but I think we're going to be impacted directly. And we just ask you to please really review this deeply and listen to the rest of what we all have to say. Thank you for your time.
My name is Cindy, and I'm Courtney's other half. And we have had chronic and constant problems with the neighbors next door. It's not going to be a motel. It's going to be an Airbnb. And there's constant parties that are just ongoing to the point that it's enough to mention that we've had to call the police several times on that house. It's a noisy, crazy party house. And, what else was I going to say? They were doing construction on it, and they were doing it under the radar. I don't really think that you guys, because there's asbestos and stuff most likely and all, but they were doing all that stuff to get it together when they bought it a couple of years ago. They were working on it covetly, is that the right word? What else was I going to say, Court?
Just the parking is the issue at this moment.
That's okay. And the parking permits. We believe that he has gotten, the gentleman there who runs that house has gotten several parking permits. Like he gets 2, his daughter gets 2. So he has a little golf cart. So he parks the golf cart in the different spots with his trucks, and he holds the spots. So when he has the Airbnb rented, which is often on the weekends, he lets those people. He moves his golf cart in front of the house, and then he covets these spots. And when the people come that have rented it for the Airbnb, he moves his golf cart and truck away so they can park in front of the house. So he's kind of playing Robin Peter to pay Paul there. I believe he has more than 2 parking permits, but he covets all those spots. He probably has about 3 and 4 at a time that he's coveting there. Just think what it's going to be when there's 5 units, there at that corner. How crazy it's going to be with all the parking congestion and stuff that's going to happen. So we
understand the paid spots.
The paid spots. What does that mean?
So we just wanted to understand a little bit more about how the paid parking is. I mean, I understand there's a structure you're going to be building. Somebody's going to be able to pay for the abilities to future park. It just doesn't make sense. And the real reality of somebody that's going to have to park a couple blocks away that's residing in a space, that's not real.
And you're right about the motel question too, with the 1 spot. People are going to want to have, when they come to this Airbnb, they're going to want to have that spot, and that they have to fight, all these residents have to fight over 4 spots, it's not feasible. And there is a big giant parking issue, as you guys all know, and it would just congest it so much more for all of us in that quaint little street and neighborhood. It would be such a burden, plus the difference. I mean, that house is so sweet and vintage, and to have this ostentatious little 3-story right there is just so unsightly, So anyway, we just want you guys to go back to your old-fashioned ways and days and have a little consideration for keeping Hermosa Beach as wonderful and as quaint and cute as it already is, and not let greed.
Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you.
If you mind me asking, are you at the orange and blue
Yes,
cottage directly next door?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hi there, my name's Dennis Toomey. My family and I have lived on 10th Street at number 39 for going on almost 60 years now. We go back to when it used to be kind of a nice, quiet street. It's hard to believe these days. But basically, even without this development, everything the city or the Chamber of Commerce puts into place down there has a major impact on that street. Probably more so than any other street in that area. We start out with St. Patrick's Day Parade, where they wipe out a bunch of parking on the avenue. We move on to the festival for Memorial Day, where they wipe out a bunch of parking all the way along the avenue for buses and to move the taxis so they can do their thing. 4th of July wasn't too bad this year. It was a Wednesday, so that was kind of nice. This past weekend, one of my personal favorites, Smash Fest, which woke me up at 6:30 both mornings, Friday and Saturday, as they brought all their gear down, clogged up the whole west end of the street, so if you had an emergency vehicle that needed to get through, forget it. And then we got AVP coming into town, and then into Hell Month with movies on the beach on Saturday night and concerts on the beach on Sunday night. Come on down and sit in my front yard and watch the nonstop nonsense that goes on down there. So now we got a guy who wants to do a development that requires 12 spaces, and he's asking to get rid of 2/3 of that and go with 4 spaces. And the person that's living there now already takes up 2 to 3 of the 15 spaces on the street. I found it ironic we were discussing electric vehicles. Yeah, they own an electric vehicle. They use it to save the parking space for their SUV and pickup truck, while the rest of us scramble around. I'm 68, I'm disabled. My father is 93, he's disabled. We don't need more stuff taking parking out of there. We need people to stand up and enforce these regulations that were put in place for a reason. Every city council person that came to my front door during the recent campaign was, we want to improve the quality of your life here in Hermosa Beach. We want to tackle these problems like parking. So far, all we've seen is lip service in that 60 years. All it's done has been degraded. Everything that goes through, everything that gets passes off. No, don't put in the 12 spaces. Just pay us some money and we'll give you a variance. It doesn't solve the problem. It just makes it worse for those of us that have managed to live here as long as we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Could you sign in for us, please? Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to address the commission?
Tom Nyman, 1040 Manhattan Avenue. I live between 10th and Pier, 1 block to the east, and the parking is intense. There are probably 20 parking places between 10th Street and Pier, 100%, 24/7. This project, well, let me backtrack. I agree with the builder or the developer. I think this should be a commercial development, and the house in front probably has seen its day. I have a 112-year-old house. I know what it's like to have an old house. We're not part of the Mills Act, and I don't know who it is that's determining that this house should be kept as a historical site, because it's really not serving that property. The property is a commercial property, or it's been rezoned as a commercial property, and I think that's what the use should be. The way it is now, it's going to just intensify the parking down there. And don't forget those 5 or 6 commercial that building with 5 or 6 units in it. Everybody, as soon as they get their bill from the city, is going to run up and get themselves a parking sticker or a parking ticket. And that's going to intensify the use of the parking down in our area. And I would suggest that the developer has an opportunity to develop it as a commercial site and not as an Airbnb plus the commercial site, because as the previous people were talking about,
that Airbnb concept is not compatible with the residential district that they're living in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. Gosh, commissioners and I don't know, chairperson.
Thank you.
Hi. My name is Carol James. I live at 60 10th Street. We've lived there since 1954. And when I was a kid, there was a Mr. Reno. The Renos owned that house on the corner, and he sold musical instruments, and he gave music lessons to kids, and that's what he did there, and they lived there. I lived there. There were no parking meters on Hermosa Beach on 10th Street when we moved there, and I remember when they were like a nickel or something like that. It was crazy. But what's happening now is that the parking is just unbelievable. You should come down on Street Sweeper Day. We have one side, it's on Monday, and the next day it's on Tuesday. So it's like the street sweeper, we listen for him in the morning, and when we hear him, everybody runs out their front door, jumps in their car, and gets behind the street sweeper so we can get on the other side of the street. And we have to wait till the next day before we move our car. And that's just the way it is. Parking is horrendous. And that is my biggest complaint about this proposal, this, whatever you call it. I'm sorry, I've never done this before either. I'm a little nervous. But the biggest problem for me is the parking, because we have no parking down there. We have parking meters in front of our house, which is crazy. And we have, there's a lot of residents that have apartments along with their buildings, or people that have half lots that have nowhere to park. And this is just going to create more parking problems. And it's been my experience that a lot of the people that have businesses down there or employees down there, they buy residential stickers from the city, and it's always and whenever they do these new developments, it's in lieu of providing all the parking spaces necessary. They pay the city money, but I don't see that money going to address the parking issue. We don't have more parking spaces, and how does somebody buy a parking space that doesn't exist? I don't get that. It's just really, it's highly congested area. And we have a lot of events going on down there constantly. And don't get, I love Hermosa Beach. I grew up here. I went to Pure Avenue Junior High School. I went to South School. I love the city. My parents used to own restaurants, businesses on the Strand. The old Biltmore Hotel was beautiful. Now, that's a historical site. That I'm sorry that building's not still here. But oh gosh, and you're smiling. You remember it, huh? But I just really my biggest issue is the parking. It's just we just don't have it. And I just wish that you would take that into consideration. Thank you. Oh.
We will. Thank you, Carol. Would anyone else like to address the commission? Mr. Lacey?
Hi, guys.
Hello.
Dressed down. I didn't find out about this till this afternoon. I got the mailer today, and I go, really? I didn't find out till now. So anyway.
What, Mike, you need to.
Oh, okay.
Well,
yeah, let me sign in.
I'm sorry. Sorry, Mike. Shucks. What do we put? What issue is it? E3.
Let's take this lull to say what a nice article about your
Yes.
establishment that
Oh,
just
thanks.
ran.
Thank you very much. Well, thanks for staying here tonight, you guys, and doing all this. I know it's a lot of work for you guys, so thank you for all your time. So anyway, I think this thing is a train wreck. And I don't mean to throw anybody under the bus here. I mean, I think it's a very difficult problem. For the developers, it's really hard because now there's this issue with the house. For all of you to try to make the best decision, to try to make a lot work on this little tiny lot that we've driven the price up so high that they have to build a lot to break even. So this is a hard problem, and I appreciate how difficult it is for you. But the problem I have more than anything else is that it is being used by an Airbnb. And if you talk about parking, if there's 100 people there at a party, there's the real parking impact, and those are just not controlled. We don't have a system in the city to control those at all. So I don't know how this is going to go. I think at least case this should be changed to a commercial use, like if that were like the gum tree or something where a successful business has operated a restored home. That makes a lot more sense than it being a Airbnb. I love to restore stuff, as you know, all the costumes and posters in the club. But the problem is they're in a bad place. If it has to be an Airbnb, that's going to get ripped to shreds every 2 weeks. So how do you restore a house that's going to go through that wear and tear? So I think at least it should be a commercial use like the gum tree and then an office building. But, you know, we're all concerned about parking and all of those things. And I feel your pain and their pain, because this is a tough one, and the parking is hard. It would have been great if this all could have been offices above and 12 or 15 parking places below. But it's not the developer's fault, because they tried that, and it's not, you know, the residents' fault. It's just a difficult thing. But please, if we can change that so that Airbnb is not, it can't be a hotel, because hotels can't operate with one room. It's going to be a party house, and I don't think that's a good scenario. I think it's going to drive the price of all our real estate down, and I just don't think that's a good scenario for it. Maybe a gum tree. Okay? Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mike.
Hi again. Just an observation. I used to be on this commission, and I've never seen so many assistant planners. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, including the Ken himself. Okay. Amazes me. Do we have a historical district in town designated as such? Then if we don't, then why is this guy being forced to kind of shoehorn in a building in addition to a historical building? It just doesn't make sense, because when I looked at the notice on the building and read it all and everything that was going to go on there, I thought, there's something missing here, and I realized it was a Ferris wheel. That's what I didn't see. Other than that, I saw a lot of stuff, and all simply because, and I don't know, is it's going to make him any money, because when you have to have, 8 spaces at $30,000 a space, is it, for in lieu fee? And then you've got to bring that building up to snuff, and then listening to people today talk about how that building's going to have to be checked over every time the latest party group leaves. It seems like a money loser. Why don't we just let them do, if it's not a designated historical area, how can you force these people to do it when the guy next door maybe doesn't want to do it and eventually sells and tries to make some money off of his place? And if you force him to keep it a historical thing, then I think you're also depleting values on the places along there. And if you do that, that's something that you ought to inform the neighborhood of now, rather than only when they get around to selling it. And so if you're going to make it a historical district, make it a historical district. Hold a hearing on it and see whether or not that even passes. But it just seems like right now you're shoehorning in something that is going to look awful, to tell you the truth. On the plus side, the architect, I'll give him credit. He built my house. I have a 2,600 square foot lot. I have 6 parking spaces on my 2,600 square foot lot with my 3,800 square foot home. So he knows how to build, okay? And he's doing his best to try to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Would anyone else like to address the commission on this issue? Would you like to come back up and do we close public comment and ask the no, please come on up, and if you'd like to rebut some comments. Mr. Thomas.
Thank you for your time, and I understand the community's concern about the parking and so on and so forth. I would like to say that I've been coming to Hermosa Beach. I went to McCandless Elementary when I was a youngster, and I've been looking for parking spots in Hermosa Beach for as long as I can possibly remember. We did not want to do this current project. I want to make that clear. We didn't think it was the best use for the property to keep that house there. What happened was when the historical evaluation was done and it was deemed that the property was not a historical property, and I quote, not a historical property, but could be considered a historical resource. That's when our group said, let's work with the community and develop this historical resource so it can stay intact for years to come, because it appears that's what the community wants. So we were not trying to stick any one-unit hotel down anybody's throat. It was the idea of a 1-month rental or a 2-week rental or something like that for the community. And I would like to make just one other point about the current tenant, the lack of permits that the developer possibly did not pool, and the so-called Airbnb that's been going on. First off, we were notified about 1 week after that tenant took possession of the property that there was work being done there. We gave him a letter and a copy of that letter to the city that if there's to be any work on that property, we want all permits pulled immediately, or you could vacate the property, number one. So to the best of our knowledge, any work that has been done on that property does have the proper permits. On the second point, that tenant was supposed to be there for 5 months, 6 months. Normally, it's my experience, and I have developed in Hermosa Beach before, it takes between 6 and 8 months to get a plan approved. So that was a temporary situation, and it is no way our intent to have some, quote, party house at this location. Now, after listening to the comments of the neighbors, I understand, and I think it might be interesting to adopt some type of resolution with this plan, if you do approve it, to maintain that tenants that stay inside of that property have to adhere to residential standards, right? And I think that brings in a whole new equation to laws that would regulate. I think in residential areas you can only have so much noise so late before neighbors can complain and stuff, and we would surely be amenable to that, because it is not the goal to create a party house in downtown Hermosa Beach. It's to preserve the historical property that it appears the community wants to have.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you.
So we'll close public comment at this time and bring it back to the commission. Kim and Ken and Lauren, we heard a couple comments that I'd like to address and just get some clarity on, so that we're have the correct information from the get-go. So there's some statements were made by the applicant and the architect that basically there was no choice but to keep the cottage, and that there's a historical significance. And so could we just address that right now?
Sure. Thank you. And yes, this has been a long process. And when they first came in March of 2016, they had bought the property and they submitted their plan. And we, as we do with every discretionary project, we have to do a CEQA review. If it qualifies for a categorical exemption, as you'll see most of the things on your agenda do, then we're done. But if it doesn't, we have to do an initial study. This one did not qualify for a categorical exemption under CEQA. We had to do an initial study. And it revealed that there were some potentially significant impacts, one of which would be historical. We advised the applicant in April, not even a whole month later, hey, here's what we're finding. If you want, we can hire a historic consultant to do a professional historic assessment under CEQA to see if it actually qualifies as a historic resource under CEQA. We'll hire them, we'll manage them to keep it all, impartial. You'll have to reimburse us, and we got quotes for them. And they made the decision to go forward and do that. They didn't have to, but they did. They could change their project, but they're like, no, here's what we want to do, and they wanted at that time to demo the existing structure and redevelop the entire property. That was their project at that time. So we took that to a historic assessment, and they did an assessment of the existing structure. And it came back, they're right, in and of itself, that single building is not a historic resource under CEQA. But as a collection, and if you look at page 47, I mean, you can skip through the rest of this report and just go to 47 on this historic assessment. The conclusion says, although it's not all by itself a historic resource, it is a contributor to an eligible historic district of beach bungalows. It's a rare grouping of early 20th century beach dwellings that remains in Hermosa Beach, and the only one in close proximity to the beach. It appears eligible for the National Register and the California Register at the local level for its association with early development of Hermosa Beach as a Southern California beach town, and as embodying the distinctive characteristics of the beach bungalow property type. As such, the district and 7010th Street as a contributor to the eligible historic district are considered historic resources under CEQA. Once we got that determination from those professionals, we advised them, okay, you have a choice to make here. They weren't forced to do anything. They had a choice. You can, if you want to go with your project, which is to demo and build a whole new thing, it would require an EIR. And we gave them ballpark estimates on time and costs, which are very costly and extremely lengthy. Or you have an option. Another option is if you want to try to bring this down to a mitigated negative declaration level, try to kind of preserve the eligible historic resource and work with the rest of the property. And if you want to do that, the city could hire this consultant and to work with you on a redesign, and maybe we can get it down to a mitigated neg deck, and the timing on that is considerably less, and the cost is very much less. They took about 11 months to make that, to come to a decision on that. And it's a tough decision. They went back and forth. At one point, they asked us to put the project on hold. They marketed it as they looked at then, they came back and said, hey, we think we want to build a 10-bedroom B&B. So that was considered, and I think the architect got involved and said, whoa, there's no way we can park that. So then they came back and changed their plan to similar to what you see today. They made the decision, and they submitted a plan. It took about 4 months for them to get their plans complete so that we could send it, in other words, compliant with the zoning code, so that we could send it off the historic consultant that we retained to look at it and say, hey, will this not impact the historic resource aspect of it? And it came back within 6 weeks, okay, fine, this will work. At that time, the applicant decided to make some further changes to their project. We warned them that, hey, this is going to be another 2-3 months delay, but that they wanted to do that, and so they made that choice. So this project is what they have chosen to do, and they have had choices along the way. They have been tough choices, but they have had choices, and the city didn't force them to do anything. It's just, this is a tough and challenging property. It's small. It's got, existing structures on it. So this is a challenging property to develop.
And thank you, Kim, for that, because I think it really sort of clears the decks, and we're all understanding that this designation came with the purchase of the property. It is what it is. It's a 1910 cottage that's part of something that could be designated, and so there are choices to be made there. The city is not forcing the applicant to do anything. The choices are theirs to make. Clearly, they bought it because they stated it when they came up to develop, tear it down, and develop, and then these other process pieces came into play, and it seems like they perhaps didn't know that was the case. So thank you for that explanation. The second thing I wanted to bring forward from public comment is this idea of what does paying for parking, or what we call in lieu, right? When we say there's spaces required by code for you to move forward with your project, and then we allow it to be parked with less because somebody writes a check. So what is that in lieu about? What is the purpose of it, and what parking does it actually deliver? Because believe it or not, it does deliver parking, hopefully eventually somewhere. So Ken, if you could address that.
So we've had a parking in lieu fee program in place since the early 1980s. The city was actually very cutting edge to have such a program. I mean, the idea is that in a district where there's a lot of small commercial lots, providing parking on site is either not feasible or it's not consistent with the character of a downtown like that. So we've had this program in place, like I said, so it's almost going on 40 years. And the idea is, like I said, it's consistent with the general plan as it speaks to a park once concept, that parking in a district like this with a lot of small commercial lots is better shared off-site than turning all our small lots into parking lots on the first floor with, you know, elevated offices above. So it's a character question as well as a, you know, consistent with kind of what a vibrant small downtown should be like. It's interesting, just an anecdote. The 30 years I've been working, we constantly get contacted by other cities interested in doing some kind of parking in lieu program. We were kind of ahead of our time. It's very innovative, and it creates opportunities that would otherwise not be there. And to have a successful program that actually the Coastal Commission agreed to was, we were kind of ahead of the game on that. So that's the kind of the underlying concept. The way it works, and this is through our agreement with the Coastal Commission, is instead of providing required parking on site, the money gets contributed to a fund that when it accumulates up to a certain point, we would actually construct additional parking supply in the district. We provided an attachment to show kind of the history of the program, and you can see the first few parking in lieu fees that were collected in the beginning of the program actually that money went towards it was a small portion of it, but it went towards the construction of the municipal parking structure, what we call Lot C. So that's a perfect example of how that works. The money gets set aside in our general fund, but it's earmarked only for building parking. So that's, I guess that's where we're at. I guess we've had several more spaces where we've collected funds, but it really hasn't been that many since that time, and so the fund is accumulating. Our obligation with the Coastal Commission is when that number of in lieu spaces that we've offered out there without actually providing parking reaches 100, we are obligated to construct more parking, or we will not be able to offer any more in lieu parking fees.
Okay, so there was an attachment to our agenda, it was a supplemental, and staff did a great job of laying out the current projects approved and paid that were in lieu parking has been approved to satisfy the parking requirement. So if you haven't seen that, you can take a look at it and see what we're talking about the particular detail.
Yeah, I guess I want to make a couple more quick points. Sorry. This lot right here is kind of a perfect example of why the parking in lieu fee program makes sense. I think it's kind of obvious. It's really challenging to try to park enough stalls on this site without ending up with something that would just be completely inconsistent with the character of that district.
So as always, we're doing this balance between a couple different things: culture, character, use, sort of the nature of the neighborhood, wanting to preserve a downtown, encourage business. So there's sort of a lot of issues that we want to look at. So thank you for taking us through. There was another question. Mr. Lacey sort of talked about there's no controls over the use of the property currently as a STVR, short-term vacation rental. You referred to it as Airbnb, but it's in general a short-term vacation rental. So can you talk to us, and that is an allowed use because this is a commercially zoned property. Can you talk to us about the changes, if this is now a motel, are there limits and conditions that come into play that wouldn't if we left it as an STVR? What are the advantages to this becoming designated as a motel?
Since we haven't specifically addressed the problem of non-conforming residential uses in commercial zones and designating the legality of short-term vacation rentals, making it a motel, I would actually make it conforming with a use that's allowed in the commercial zone, and then we could collect the TOT. So it would be a legitimate commercial use.
So that's the financial piece.
Right.
But what about the use of it.
In terms of,
Numbers of people, noise, nuisance, parking, like are there, what rules and conditions would apply to this now as a motel property?
I
know there's
wanna
probably
speak to-
health department.
Basically,
codes.
the occupancy would change under the building code that wouldn't require any major changes. We spoke to this issue, but there would probably have to be, exit signs inside the building.
Fire extinguisher.
Things that you would typically see in a motel
But it's
to
a-
make sure the residents or the occupants are safe.
Right.
But
But it's not a use that requires a CUP in that district, so you wouldn't place
Right.
any operation, that we wouldn't have any operating conditions other than what he's talking about for like building code issues, like fire safety, exiting issues, stuff like that.
So really, the use comes into conformity because it's now designated motel, which is a commercial use, so now it's not a non-conforming
Right.
use, but there's the collection of TOT, which is transient occupancy tax, so that's a revenue stream for the city that we could immediately collect rather than the other piece we have to go through. So that's an advantage. But as far as the use of it in terms of the numbers of occupants within, no, nothing additional there. Okay.
No.
I think that summarizes everything I took down from public comment that I wanted to follow up on before we began our deliberations. But if anybody has anything they want to add, let's start our questions of staff. Commissioner
Madam
Seaman. Sure.
Kim, the speech you gave about page 47 was very informative and really eloquent, but bottom line is, could they tear that house down if they wanted to?
So no, they would need a coastal development permit to do that. And the coastal commission would of course see all this information and say, hey, wait a minute. You've got a CEQA issue here.
Would they say no, yes, or?
They can say
well, there's
whatever
a
they want.
process?
Well, if they were just to go, even if they hadn't come forward to us, any demolitions in the coastal zone require a coastal development permit.
Right.
So they would have to go to the coastal commission and ask them for that. And it'll be up to that agency whether they're going to give it to or not. We can't speak for them.
Right. Had they just continued with their original idea of tearing it down and building a commercial building on the whole thing, they would still have had to go to the coastal commission.
They still have to go to the coastal commission with this if we give them approval.
Whether or not that was a historic building or not.
Right.
But the other big issue was part of that, why they made the choice they did, is that and Kim spoke to this, is they would have had to prepare an environmental impact report.
Right, an EIR.
So the EIR is a disclosure document, and then we would have found out the details about what we found out more or less in here about the historic eligibility here. Ultimately, the decision as to whether that could be demolished is in the hands of the decision makers if they want to make a statement of overriding considerations that somehow the benefits of demolishing that building and allowing the project outweigh the environmental impacts of losing the potential eligible historic resource.
All right.
And that's the process.
Possible.
It's a process.
Yes.
Would have been possible, but who knows? The outcome is unpredictable and costly. So that's why they made the choice.
But
they
Ken,
did.
just to jump in, the EIR would mean it would have come to this body.
Yes.
Sure.
We would have looked at it.
Right.
To look at the significant impacts,
Mhm.
potential impacts, et cetera, and
Like
then
all the
make
other
that statement of
EIRs.
overriding concern. So it would have come to us.
Right, but then it would still have to jump through hoops with the coastal commission.
Right, and this,
Regardless
As all
of the
property-
EIR and
right.
all
Right.
findings
But-
and so on.
As all properties do in the coastal zone.
Okay.
But typically, if the coastal commission saw that we went through an EIR, made a statement about, they would see that we dealt with the CEQA process through our.
Right.
And so I don't know if they would second guess that, but you just never know.
Okay, so, and then I'd just like to clarify one other thing, was the other question about the requirements to become a motel, would be it one unit or not. And I think it's unfair to call it a short-term rental, although it clearly is. It could be, as a motel, it's by nature a short-term rental because that's what motels do. You don't need to rent a motel room for more than a month to live there. So I'm not so much about the party situation, but about the physical building. If it's indeed considered a motel, then it would have to meet a health standard, a health department approval, have to go through health department permits, all of the other things about a motel, fire extinguishers, fire sprinkler systems, and parking. ADA requirements, perhaps. Yes, as a single-family home that is being used as a short-term rental, you do not have to do that, I think. But as a motel, you would have to provide ADA handicap.
Except there's this. It is a historic resource under CEQA. So it may be possible for the historic building code to be applied. That's a different, it's less restrictive than the regular building code. In other words, it gives leeway because it's a historic resource. So there'll be probably be a little wiggle room that the historic building code would be able to offer that building.
Oh, what a tangled web.
Anything else, Commissioner Seaman?
I better stop now.
Well,
that was.
I think that the key thing about that point is that so they can retain the historic character without seeing a bunch of handicap ramps or
So ADA,
lifts or elevators.
Right, ADA is one of the things that with a historic building code, you don't have to go there.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Flaherty.
Yeah, I did want to follow through on some of these questions on CEQA and how we even form that historic district. The historic ordinance came into existence 20 years ago, 1998. After that, the city hired a company to go out, and they did, quote, a windshield survey. That windshield survey illustrated that particular area as an historic district. So my question is,
potentially eligible. It's a key distinction.
So how ironic that the first building that ever went through any sort of historic review came out to be not historic.
The first building
The
that
first
we did.
building ever, now, during the last 20 years,
I know.
so the building in question right now is the first building presented to the city that went through a historic request.
I'm sorry, but we actually have had other properties come through and had to go through this.
No. On that district.
Oh, on that district.
On
I
that
beg your pardon.
district. So for 20 years, that area was designated by a private company that came in, hired by us, and the only historic district that they listed in their windshield survey was that 10th Street.
We used a different consultant, by the way.
Right, used a different consultant. So, 20 years later, none of the 5 properties in question that were considered to be a historic district have ever applied to be an historic building. And the first one was then designated not to be historic. So I'm confused why we still rely on a 20-year-old windshield survey that designated that to be an historic district, with one other caveat. During the general plan, there's no reference in our historic district general plan statement. It's one page, doesn't even mention this district. But I remember distinctly about the emphasis that all 5 of us made on volunteering. So, my question again to you, the other 4 pieces of property, which we have a property owner sitting with us right now that lives next door, that sits in the only other commercial zone property in this area. The rest of them are all residential high density or residential medium density. Why isn't there a need for us to reassess whether that truly is an historic, potential historic district?
Okay, I'd like to answer your first question first. Why did we use that windshield survey? We didn't. This had nothing to do with the Plan Hermosa. This was submitted well before Plan Hermosa was adopted. Mm-hmm. This is all about CEQA. Now, it has been assessed. It has been determined that it's an eligible historic resource under CEQA. We only studied it for CEQA purposes. We are obligated for every discretionary project to do a CEQA review.
And CEQA treats eligible properties the same as designated properties for purposes of protecting the environment and protecting resources. For all of these procedural requirements, they're treated the same, even if they're not designated.
Right.
So far, you haven't answered my question to my satisfaction, but I appreciate your answers.
Did we not get, what part did we miss? I want to make sure we answer your question.
I don't understand why we still have, how would the word potential historic district still in our vocabulary?
It's CEQA. That's CEQA language.
How did they get in, how did they develop that word?
Who?
Oh, how did CEQA, if we didn't have it on our books, if we didn't have it as a statement that we've talked about at general plan, why do we still have to have it? Why can't we go back to that document that originally stated this is the only potential historic, does CEQA have, tell me why, if the professional ruling on the property in question is already deemed to be not historic.
That's not what it says.
That's
it
not.
says it's eligible for a district. But CEQA tells you have to look at both your local designation criteria and your state. And so this says that it's eligible, doesn't it say that for the National Register and the California Register at the local level under criteria A. So it says it's eligible.
And as such, it says it is considered a historic resource under CEQA.
So all the talk that we had in the general plan about being volunteer is out the window.
No, they don't have to volunteer to designate the district. They've lived there for years.
Yeah, but Commissioner Flaherty, I think we tried our best to explain during the general plan process that what we were doing in the general plan was separate from CEQA.
Yeah.
That CEQA casts a wide net no matter what we do. Whenever there's a discretionary project, historical resources have to eligibility of has to be evaluated. I guess the way to do it is that the California Environmental Quality Act trumps what or is like overarching over whatever our local policies are.
What does CEQA mean?
It's the
California Environmental Quality Act. It's the state's procedures for studying environmental impacts for projects.
So there's so many steps. If you live in the coastal zone, if you have a CEQA requirement, is the CEQA requirement if he was up on 5th Street?
Yes.
Okay. There was the CEQA requirement up on 5th Street, and they tore down a house that was 100 years old just recently. What steps did it have to go through?
All they had to do is come in and apply for a demolition permit, which is a ministerial act under CEQA. No discretionary review. We issued the demolition permit. The difference here is in the coastal zone, a coastal development, a demolition is considered development under the Coastal Act. They have to get a coastal development permit. So we cannot issue a demolition permit in the coastal zone without a coastal development permit.
I think
is this complicated enough for all you guys?
I know you went through this process with the developer. I know they spent 2.5 years with you guys doing this. I just feel what happens to the property next door? Do they have to go through the same thing?
We would look for an exemption. If an exemption didn't apply, you look at the initial study. It's the same, as long as there's a discretionary city decision.
So all 5 of those pieces of the property, because they're in the coastal zone, number 1. Number 2, are subject to CEQA. All would have to go through the same process that might involve them not being able to demo their house. So my question still is, all the rest of the properties would have to go through this same process. What about the houses that are not designated historic? Right now, on the windshield surveys listed in this document, the other there's 15 pieces of property down there on either side of the street. They're residential. Only 4 or 5 are listed in this newest document that say that could be potential historic. Do those other properties have to go through a CEQA?
Every project, it depends what's on the property and what they apply for, but every project that requires a discretionary decision by the city goes through some level of CEQA review. But it would depend on many factors with those houses to determine what level that is. And I don't think it would be a good idea to say here tonight that a certain property is going to be designated one thing and another one isn't, because so many factors, as you can tell from this property, so many factors go into that decision.
So quite frankly, parking isn't an issue anymore for those property owners down there. It's the loss of their ability to demo their house.
Absolutely. And, you know, in fairness to Commissioner Flaherty, so everyone's clear, on page 1, it cites the city's 2014 wind chill survey as the basis for identifying a potential district down there. And we beat this to death. We beat this to death, and that's why I'm up here having, with all due respect, Nicole, heart palpitations that we're going through the same debate again that we did over and over and over again with a wind chill survey that was, as a professional, so poorly done as to be embarrassing that the city allowed this to become part of the basis for making decisions like this. People are sitting here, I don't approve this, but we're talking about a loss of property values to the property owners down there of millions of dollars. And we're going through the same debate we beat to death with a room full of developers, realtors, and property owners, and here we are again. And I appreciate you can pass the buck and say it's the CEQA and it's all of that, but it's also the city has to share. And when I say that all of us share some culpability in this by virtue of embracing that survey.
Their property is worth $3,600,000. We paid $765,000.
I'm sorry, there's no public comment at this time, and we can't address or answer, so thank you. Sorry, it's all up here now. Okay, thanks. So Ken, did you want to address anything that Commissioner Hoffman?
No, I do not. I think we're really, I guess I would just generally say we're really diverting from the issue at hand here. I mean, I know it's related and they're important questions, but
I think it was an important avenue to go down because it's a complex project with a lot of elements. I think if one of you could sort of summarize, get us back to what we're doing here and what the constraints are would be helpful, because we did go down a bunch of rabbit holes, which I think was very useful. And I appreciate them, and I think it's important for people to understand that these are really complex matters. And thank you for your patience. But if you could bring us back to what we're looking at.
Because the project was revised to now retain the structure, so they had to go through fewer loopholes with CEQA. It's a simpler environmental review if you retain the structure rather than demolish it. It doesn't prevent anyone from demolishing their structure.
You can do that.
It's a cheaper, less expensive, more focused environmental analysis.
Yeah.
and it just seems to me generally there's a little, we're kind of overly concerned with the process, and maybe you should think in bigger picture. Do you see, the commission might want to think, do you see value in retaining this part of our heritage? I mean, that's kind of the question at hand here. If you do or you don't, I mean,
Commissioner
I think
Peterson.
there's still policies in our general plan about our cultural heritage, and people are concerned about the loss of these kind of structures. But
well, I mean, we've covered a lot of topics here, and I actually took some notes from public comment I'm happy to comment on, but all we can vote on is what's in front of us. So so that's why, I mean, I'm happy to present comments on that. I have a take, but I don't know if we're, debating a motion or not, or up or down, but if there are takeoff points from this to go to another discussion, another meeting, but all we can do is vote up or down on the project in front of us as proposed, and however many years it took to get here.
It's not part of it.
Some of the other sort of market color to it is just, I won't say unnecessary detail, but perhaps some diversions. All we can do is vote on what's in front of us. And I don't think we've explored all the options, or not, I shouldn't say all the options, but all the nuance specific to some of the other aspects
Well,
of the
Commissioner
project.
Peterson, go.
All right.
Take us there.
Well, these are my thoughts on the project, and some of this I'd heard before. I did speak with Kim earlier today, in a brisk 25-minute phone call. We went through a lot of this as well as another project. But I did come away with the understanding that there were, different options for the property owner to take in different directions, to take different cost levels of environmental review. Maybe not the tastiest options, but a couple options to make. They made a choice, and we're now into this process. There were comments made in terms of sort of, lifestyle, street impact, number of events downtown, et cetera. Some of those are beyond our purview, and obviously, and some of those are just unavoidable. Rights to shadow versus sunlight, that's not in our purview. I prefer sunlight myself. I do think we did a nice presentation on the in lieu of parking, so I won't go to that. I know there's a balance that is invested on the city's behalf for those that didn't go into the structure. In terms of the specific project itself, we talked about different aspects of it. If I'm looking at the project that was originally proposed that would have demoed the whole site, there would have been more square footage, there would have been more parking. So instead of 4 spots, there would have been 7. There would have been more square footage. There probably still would have been 8 in lieu of spots, give or take. I'm getting some head nods from the back of the room off the record. So we still would have gotten to this point of approving in lieu of parking. What I notice here is that increasingly the sites, the in lieu of parking that we've approved has been 10, 20, 30% of the parking requirement, not 75% of the parking requirement. On page 7 of the staff report, there's a sentence that, and I'll ask for clarification or confirmation from my team to the right, but it says, in accepting in lieu parking, the commission must find that the parking deficiency will not unduly impact the surrounding area. I have trouble coming to that determination. I do think that it will unduly impact the surrounding area. That's my challenge. So, that my leaning has been against the project size. This town was laid out really well for 100 years ago in terms of right-of-way width and lot size, and we all do the best we can with what we have here. The layout of the town didn't presuppose a lot of things, escalades and amplified sound and all those sorts of things. So we do the best we can with an imperfect situation, and this lot is a conundrum, no doubt. But based on what I'm seeing and based on what I'm being told, that I must find in terms of accepting in lieu of parking, I'm just having trouble crossing that line to do that. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Seaman, would you like to weigh in?
Yes, and I would really love to spend another hour or so debating the CEQA business and so on. When we were doing with the general plan, I was very much against taking away personal property rights for any reason, including historic districts and so on. While I do have a personal feeling toward these historic buildings, as I said in the beginning, I think it was a good thing to try and save the house and so on and so forth. I like the idea that you melded the architectural elements together in order to make it feel more like part of that historic district. But I was there today, and I think that debate is for another day. So on to what we are here to do is talk about this plan and what's going on right now. So I was there today. I spent about an hour there. Hermosa Avenue was 98, 99% full the entire time I was there. It took less than 3 minutes for someone would pull out of a space and it would be immediately taken over. There wasn't any, oh, there's 5 spaces empty now, and after a little while there was 10, and then they were all full again. It was like bees on honey. There was really no parking on Hermosa Avenue, from Pier Avenue all the way down to about, I don't know, 6th Street, I guess, or way past that, by Mickey's. 10th Street. There's 18 spaces on 10th Street. They all have yellow poles, which allows you to park there with a city a sticker. I live in a few blocks away, and we're a heavily impacted area, and they issue stickers in my neighborhood too. There are no poles, but we issue stickers. I also play street sweeper roulette every Wednesday and Thursday. It's the same deal. It's a problem that we all kind of live with. Parking is a big, huge problem, and in this district, it's amazing. I also checked the parking lot, which is behind Sharky's, et cetera, which is that C or B? Or A, or Lot A?
That's parking lot A.
All right, parking lot A, 98% full. I sat there in a parking space, in front of a parking space, I wasn't in one, because there weren't any. I sat there and watched. Once in a while a car would leave, and immediately a car would come in and fill that space. I think that the parking in that area for blocks around, including Lot A, is heavily impacted. It's full, completely full. I don't know what could be done to fix that, but at this point, I feel like in lieu parking, first of all, there are mythical spaces that we may never see. I really don't understand. I know that we save the money and then eventually pays for parking, like the parking structure by the hotel. But 50 years we've been collecting money, and we built one little parking lot, which I believe the hotel paid for part of that. And so I just really, in lieu parking doesn't mean a hill of beans to the folks that live on 10th Street or anywhere around there. And so I think the 4 spaces out of 12 is not a good ratio for in lieu parking. So I have a tendency to say no to this. And that brings us back to this question that we have about tearing down the house or not. If we were to not, and I don't know how my fellow commissioners are going to vote, but let's say we deny this, then they're faced with the possibility of going through the Coastal Commission and CEQA and so on, and all these environmental impact reports, et cetera. That's an uphill battle that they'll have to go through to come up with another idea here. So I don't know what to say about that. I would have liked to save the house, but I think at this point, 4 out of 12 is just really not getting it. There must be some other way to provide more parking there.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Flaherty?
Yeah, I just want to review and thank you, Dave, for bringing me back into decision-making on the subject matter rather than arguing about 2 years' worth of arguments we had on the general plan. But I want to look at the existing property, and there is some history that I'm aware of 20-ish some years ago with Ken's predecessor, who came down to Public Works and took out a full parking spot in the front of that house, turned it into a driveway, and has since been parking vehicles across sidewalks into an area where you can't get a full-size car. They drive through the driveway and then off Hermosa Avenue on the ramp. I've taken pictures over the years, over the months. Even yesterday, there was a car parked up on the bricks in the same way, and the previous pictures is a full-size SUV parking across the sidewalk because they can't get in that narrow space. The new proposal shows it to have no parking space there. I thought that was a genius move. The trouble is they're using that as a trash enclosure area, illustrating no parking, but have not put the parking spot back on the street. Well, yeah, because you can't get the trash can out if you close off the parking spot. So the other thing is the existing piece of property, when they started doing the remodels a couple years ago, for the first time in a long, long time, they actually opened the back gate where you get into the backyard. Currently, what's sitting in that front of that gate where you can't get anybody in the backyard to park, so they park out in front on the bricks, or is a trailer. Whether it's being used by the manager, whether it's being used by other things. So that, again, that really doesn't have anything to do with approving this site. I have all similar concerns about in lieu and parking and so on and so forth. But I do think the neighborhood needs to get that parking space back in front if it's no longer going to be used as a driveway or an access point to park on the bricks in front of the house, which I think is pretty seedy, but that parking is parking. You can't talk about parking in Hermosa without realizing half the town scrambles to park anywhere they can. So those are my comments. I'm sympathetic to how this process worked. If it means they have to take a longer road to get there and bring it back to us, I'm okay with that.
Thank you, Commissioner Flaherty. Commissioner Hoffman.
I'm going to try and, it's interesting, I looked at my own notes here and I wrote it was a perfect storm. And once again, Mr. Lacey was more articulate when he referred to it as a train wreck. And part of my concern here is, you know, we're saying, well, maybe we need to take longer. But let's not forget that we've been looking at the city staff and the applicant's been looking at this project for approaching 3 years. I think the architect and the applicant have done a rather miraculous job of trying to develop this property given the constraints imposed by, I won't get into the debate again, by the potential designation of a potential district and so on. But I'm bothered by the fact that if I retain that building, the proposed use is more potentially problematic than were we to retain that building as a conforming use, that is, make it a shop of some kind, make it an office of some kind. The example that was given, of course, is what's already happened up there at Gumtree, so it can be done. And I just hate to be micromanaging someone else's money and investment on their own private property, noting that everything that's been put in front of us today meets all codes and requirements. I know there was an objection to the 30-foot height limit. There's a 30-foot building or one that's nearly so. I don't, have the survey immediately adjacent to where this would be. And then across, it meets all of the code. The in lieu parking issue is then the critical one. And as Commissioner Peterson has pointed out, we have to make a finding to do that. And the problem here is unknown tenants, in the sense that there are certain uses that would work. We dealt with this earlier. You put an upholstery shop up there on the highway, it works fine. You put a sales unit there, and it may not work. You put an accountant in here that does income tax privately, it works. You put other kinds of businesses in here, the parking issue becomes problematic, compounded by the hotel use, motel, whatever we're calling this. I share the concerns about the parking. Again, it comes down to then purely parking. I'm looking, it's ironic, I'm looking at this building with the angle nook sticking out where the fireplace used to be. It's not a historic building. It's a building that's way outlived its use. And by the way, I'm living in a 100-year-old bungalow. I moved to Hermosa Beach to live in my 100-year-old bungalow. I pray to God when I die that my kids take a bulldozer to it and build the 2 condos they're entitled to build on it. That's their right. That's my property right. But that notwithstanding, I'm having trouble with this problem, with this project, because of the uncertainty of the findings that I'm required to make to grant the in lieu spaces, given the impact of parking in that area that's been identified by all of us. I think if this project were in another location in town, you know, the same circumstances, it might be much easier to make than it is a block from the pier. And, you know, as Commissioner Seaman points out, there's no parking today, but of course there's, you know, it's dead summer. We've got at least one tournament going down there and all the others, but that's always going on down there in the summer. So that's, you know, that was pointed out by one of the public commenters earlier. So I'm having a very difficult time addressing the parking issue, the in lieu option.
Thank you, Commissioner. So I think I hear agreement between us, a majority anyway. Let me first say that Commissioner Hoffman outlined the one thing that I was struggling with, which is what is the use of those office suites? And really, what's that use of that retail? We don't know. And as a perfect example is with the item that we saw earlier, that change in use. So I was struggling with that as well. And what we must make the finding that the in lieu spaces do not adversely impact, and that still satisfies the parking requirement. And I would agree with my colleagues that I don't make that finding. So sounds like we are in agreement. Kim, do you have anything you want to add to this conversation at this point? No? Okay. Does anybody want to make a motion?
I think it's a simple one. I move to deny the attached resolutions describing the precise development plan and parking plan.
If you want to make a motion like that, you should make a motion to direct staff to bring back a resolution of denial.
We have to make findings and explain the basis for your decision, memorialized in a resolution. We don't have that before us tonight.
Okay. I move to direct staff to bring back findings denying this PDP and parking plan.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any additional commissioner comments, deliberation? Seeing none, would you please roll call?
Thank you, Chairperson. Commissioner Hoffman?
Yes.
Commissioner Peterson?
Yes.
Commissioner Seaman?
Yes.
Commissioner Flaherty?
Yes.
Chairperson Rice?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.